Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Rojo, which is Spanish for red. It's an Argentinian film.
Yes.
Set in 1975. It's written and directed by a director called Benjamin Neistat. Apologies for the pronunciation, but it doesn't strike me as a Spanish name exactly. But,
well, there's a large Jewish community in Argentina, and that sounds like a Jewish name.
It does. He's quite young. I think he's about my age. I think he's 33.
Better hurry up, baby.
Well, to be honest, if I make films as boring as this, then...
Oh, you didn't like it?
No. It literally bored my arse off. Literally.
I think it's a film that you need to know a little bit about Argentina for it to work.
You certainly do, and I know very little.
Yeah, which is a fault with the film, actually. But nonetheless, I found it very fascinating. Actually, I was thinking, when on the drive back home, I kind of, I kept thinking about it because I kept wondering, I thought I was paying attention at the beginning, but before you know the characters, who the characters are and so on, you don't really. So I was trying to make sense of, because the film begins with this house, yeah, and somebody walks out of the house, and then somebody walks into the house and walks out of the house, and I was trying to remember if there was a connection between that and, at the end of the film, the protagonist, who is that Dario Grandinetti, who's this very famous Argentinian actor, puts a wig on, so he's been like pretty much bald-headed, natural hair throughout the film, and then puts a wig on, and I couldn't make sense of that. I didn't understand what the wig was about, and then I was wondering, is he, with this wig on, one of the guys that left the house, or? I think
that opening shot, I mean, it has a feeling of like a Hanukkah kind of shot, where you don't know exactly what you're supposed to be looking at, in a way, and it's just this nice sort of suburban house. And seemingly kind of nice, well-to-do people are going in and out taking stuff. So you're going, what's going on here? And I think, but I don't remember exactly, that he is one of the people who goes into the house.
Okay, you see that?
I think he goes in and comes out, and then he goes back in, I think. But
okay.
But I mean, that is the very first shot of the film. So.
The house is important because, so basically the house is a symbol for all that's wrong in Argentina in that period, and which is about to get a lot worse. And actually, I think it is something that should resonate with us now. Because what happens is, these are people who have disappeared. Right? So basically, kind of, people say, oh, they're on a trip or something, but actually they have just been disappeared. And then basically, they're disappeared, and so people begin to take the spoils. So these people who had once been their nice neighbors are all of a sudden taking their furniture and their thing. And then, one of the big plot points in the film is pretending that they're selling the house. So actually, that they can actually make money out of somebody else's property. And to me, that resonated very much with Nazi Germany's,
collaborators.
Yeah, but also, that kind of, you've lived with people all your life and you like them, and all of a sudden they're made to disappear by the government or whatever, and the first thing people do is loot the house, steal the paintings, and then take possession of the house, right? So it is about nice people collaborating and kind of and letting things go. Yeah, kind of, these are major things. People keep disappearing in the film, at kind of a teenager, even a magician who works in a nightclub makes people disappear. And this is actually before the military really comes in 78, before people start getting shot.
Yeah, this is 1975.
Yeah.
So this is prior to the military junta that took control.
Yes, I think it's 78. I'm not too sure of the history. But it's... But
this film was certainly prior to that, because there's talk of... right at the end of the film, there's talk of, I hear the coup's going to start tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
So this is definitely before that happens.
That's right. And there's a lot of talk of, Argentina, and aren't we great in a blessed land, and all people want is peace and quiet and to live their lives. And it's true, right? The film shows that, but it also shows the small scale letting things go, small acts of violence, right? People trying to profit out of other people's misery, and it's all done in a very kind of low-key way, yeah. So it's kind of like cumulative, which I liked very much. I mean, I think actually, the film is very beautifully structured, and it's really evocative. I mean, personally, I felt it really evoked that period for me, because a lot of the soundtrack are like pop hits of the period, which are really just kind of love songs. The ones I recognized are Do You Want to Be My Lover? Yeah, Quiero Ser Tu Amante, Camilo Sesto, which was obviously kind of very big in Spain. So in a way, they're anodyne, right? And there's a whole section about kind of these two teenagers who are in love, and they're going through those things. He wants to make out, she doesn't. But that one little thing turns it into extreme violence, right? And it's partly to do with the culture, with the machismo, the control, I mean, the whole opening sequence, which is all about manners, and which I thought actually that the lawyer was very patient, right? And kind of very polite. This guy wants to take his seat. So one of the main key scenes in the film is the lawyer sitting in a restaurant. This very impatient, pushy man, comes and tells him off because he's taking too long to order. The restaurant is full, there are no tables, and really, if he's not going to be quick and order, he should get out, right, and give him the place. So the lawyer does end up giving him the place in a very polite way, but then tells him off and says something like, you're very badly educated, and kind of, you're always going to have trouble and you're always going to have violence because, that's, you're too old to change now, and that's kind of...
And he says something like, you're going to watch people getting on with each other, and you're not going to be able to take part in it.
Yes.
And he really humiliates him in front of the restaurant, and everyone stops and listens.
Yes. Well, you see...
And clearly this lawyer is also a figure in the town. Everybody knows who he is.
Yes.
So everyone here knows.
Well, you see, later on, when the detective because this is also structured as a murder mystery. So later on, when the detective says that, you humiliated him in public, don't you think people heard? I actually myself didn't see it as a humiliation, kind of. I saw it as an answering back. I mean, this idiot has just displaced him, caused a ruckus in the restaurant. He's given up the seat, and the guy still won't shut up. So, I think almost like honor, or just, it requires some kind of response. And he responded in a very even tone of voice and very rational, and so on. So I didn't see it as a humiliation, though.
It's definitely fair enough that I think he gives a response to the guy. But, I mean, he really does sort of pick him apart as a person in what he says. Which could be seen as a humiliation.
Rightly, I thought rightly so. But, kind of...
I mean, if it's a humiliation, it's a justified humiliation. Yeah. Because the other guy tried to humiliate him, get him to stand up and bugger off.
Yeah,
so, I mean... I'm not saying it's unjust, but it is still...
Right. Okay. When the guy said it, it made me think about it. But I personally didn't experience it that way when watching it. I thought the guy was being very polite and very controlled, but telling him off.
I'll put it this way: I was with the lawyer when he was saying all of that, and it's a wonderful little monologue that he gives. But then the guy, when he starts to stew in his seat after hearing all this, and then explodes and starts calling everybody Nazis, like I got him too.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't get him, I must say. And then afterwards, the other bits I did get, because I suppose I did get that he must have been humiliated in some sense, because when he came back and so then the lawyer and his wife go in their car to go home, and the guy returns in the dark and throws rocks at their car, right? And then the lawyer goes to chase after him, and he brings out a gun.
The guy, this is not the lawyer. The other guy brings out a gun.
The hippie.
Yeah.
And then he ends up shooting himself. And then what is very interesting there is that the lawyer takes him to the doctors, but then decides, well, the doctor can't do anything for him, and says he's going to take him to a hospital. But instead of taking him to a hospital, he takes him to the desert to die.
Yeah, and leaves him there.
And leaves him there to die, right?
Which is the film's first act of Disappearance.
Yeah, exactly. So the doctor, who's all this manners, good manners, an upright citizen, and so on, is willing to let someone die so that his own reputation and so on remains untarnished, right? So, I think the film was so interesting, the way that it begins to layer on kind of these things and these ambiguities and things that help make you understand why the events that happened later happened. Yeah.
And the thing is that act at the start of the film doesn't return for a long time.
Yes.
So you skip then to 3 months in the future, and this has basically been forgotten. But of course, as the audience, you're not forgetting this. There you go. This has got to come back at some point,
Yes.
But it really doesn't for a very long time, to the point where you're going, I wonder if it's just going to sort of really not be answered. But eventually, a detective gets involved, and this all becomes active in the third act of the film. And it's kind of like it's because it's always been sitting there. And everything else has this theme and motif of disappearance of people all around, as you say. The thing with the magician, it's very particularly chosen that the trick he's doing isn't sawing a woman in half. It's disappearing a woman in a box, and then he disappears her, and then she doesn't come back, and they have to search for her to find her. Pretending the trick's gone sort of wrong. But it's like an extra level of disappearance in that trick where she can't come back straight away, and you don't even see her come back the way it's shot. No. She comes back off screen, and then you do see her again. But so it's kind of like it's, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's always there, sitting in your head.
Yeah.
That this is behind, and it has that kind of bourgeois sort of. I mean, would you describe it as a satire?
No. I don't. I mean, I would describe it as an allegory. Like, it is about that period in history, and kind of trying to understand why what happened, right? And, and what happened is that this very rich country, I mean, it was often called, the Canada of South America, right?
Right.
Very large, very rich, why... this violence erupted in the late 70s, right? Like, I mean, when I was in Buenos Aires this summer, it's like Nikki and I, we were, you look at these beautiful buildings and you go, oh my God, isn't this beautiful? Oh, isn't this beautiful? Isn't this beautiful? And then occasionally you'd look down on the sidewalk and they would have signs like, this is a school. 15 students were taken out of here in like 1978 and shot, or this is a bank, and kind of 15 people were taken away by the police and were never seen again, or there's kind of all these incidents really. So I think this village is meant to be kind of an allegory for the nation, really, and kind of asking why did it happen, kind of, and I think the film is arguing that there are these, that is kind of these small acts of collaboration, that kind of decent people do things for reasons that they understand. So, on the one hand, they just want a nice, quiet life, but they're letting all of these things slide that create the conditions for other things, And I think there's also a kind of an element on the sexism of the culture, right? You see a bull being lassoed and there's balls cut off, right? And you always see men in groups, and there are these bonding things of, are we friends, right? With very, fascistic definitions of what a friendship involves, right? And then, there's the dance, which kind of, these women are dancing around, and then kind of one of the men abducts her,
Yeah, the dance is these, 9 or 10 girls moving in a circle, and these two guys stalking around the outside, and then they choose one and pick her up and drag her off, and it's done. It's a show that's being done by these kids.
Yeah.
So it's kind of choreographed. So it's not It's not an abduction in the same way that that these other things are abduction and disappearances.
Yes.
But it's a performance of an abduction.
That's right. So it connects with all these disappearances in the film and abductions, but it makes it very explicitly gendered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and of course there's the whole incident with the young boy who thinks that his girlfriend, might be having an affair with this guy, and then they just abduct his friend, and basically he disappears, right? And it's 4 guys in a car, so you have this whole thing of how dangerous and kind of perverted male bonding is, right?
It's also because the guy that they're asking insults the boyfriend. Because the boyfriend is not even driving the car.
Yeah.
And he comes up and they drive next to him and say, "Is so and so fucking so and so?" And he says, "I don't know."
Yes.
And then he sort of says, "But if they were, there'd be a pretty good reason because you're asking me, not even them.
Yes,
like you haven't got the balls."
What kind of a man are you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when so his mate then drives them off, and it's his mate driving who decides to turn the car around and go back and say, "We'll you tell him that we'll give him a lift home."
That's right.
So that guy, the boyfriend, really isn't having a say in any of this. He is kind of he's not a macho figure.
He's an angry, passive guy, but who causes a lot of damage. So I think the film does have something about how certain notions of masculinity, or what is involved in being a man, and questions of honor and pride and so on, are part of what's responsible for this climate, right, and the society in which people are just beginning to disappear.
I think it's kind of interesting that these acts of collaboration or people kind of doing the occasional bad thing don't escalate. Like, it's not like one leads to another leads to another.
No,
that would make it, I suppose, that would give it a satirical edge, but actually it's much more realistic. People just do a thing, even when it's something as bad as taking this guy who really has no chance of living, but nonetheless taking him out to the desert to die and leaving him there. That is a very bad thing to do, but then it is just left at that for that one character, and the other things, so that's just saying that he lives with for a long time, and then it has to come back. I mean, it's like Chekhov's gun, isn't it? Like,
yes,
if you drag a guy out to the desert in the first act,
yes,
he's got to come back in the first.
I mean, I think for me, I loved a lot of it actually, and the thing is that it really makes you think. After we finished watching the film, I was going over in my head, and there were many things that there were many things that I loved. Actually, I love the camera work.
Yeah. It has a real 70s feel in the zooms.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, so evokes. I mean, actually, it feels like it could come from directly
the 70s.
that era. Yeah.
Yeah. The zooms are fantastic. Also, there's a beautiful shot where Dario Grandinetti is looking through one of those windows that are like have that glass.
Yeah, it's not frosted, but it's obscured, and it segments his face into these blocks of colour. So so as he moves across the glass, it kind of makes it like a low frame rate thing. It's a very interesting effect it has.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like a person who's not fully realized in some way, right? So I loved all of that. Some of the shots in the desert were very beautiful. I love Dario Grandinetti, who's the lawyer. Yeah, is it Grandinetti or
Grandinetti.
Grandinetti. Actually, the first time I saw him, I thought, oh my God, he's gotten old, because he's so beautiful and touching in Almodovar's Talk to Her. Yeah, he's like, the sensitive guy who writes travel books, and I don't know if you've seen that film, but
me and Almodovar.
We have to see that together. It's very beautiful. And here, the first sight of him is, he looks almost like a stereotype of the Latin guy with a mustache, and the face is kind of caved in, and he's got this posture. But then, of course, he speaks, and he's got one of the great voices in cinema. Right, it's full of feeling and expressive, and it's quite deep without being the most salient thing about it. So it's not deep the way that Richard Burton's voice is. Yeah, but it is, it is a baritone voice, and it's very expressive and also very smooth and quiet. Yeah, it's kind of, it's very soft spoken. So I thought he was fantastic in the film. The person that I don't like, but then I never like, is Alfredo Castro, who played the detective. Right? I've seen him in all of... is it Pablo Trapero, the director? Let me just quickly look it up. So, yes, I've seen him in Tony Manero, Postmortem... Yeah, that's all that I've seen him. And actually, in things like Tony Manero, he's meant to be slightly creepy and weird, and and also in Postmortem, right? So he's got an air of somebody, I don't know, slightly pervy, or kind of some kind of somebody who maybe wanks in a bush or something, in public. Like he's got that air about him. And he brings that to this film. He's in church and he's praying for God to save him from his perversions, but you're never told what those perversions are. But there's just something. I'm not sure why I didn't like that performance. Right? I don't. Yeah, but I.
Well,
but
what
I
he
don't.
brings at the end is a kind of biblical. Well, I mean, biblical theatrics, maybe. It's when he gets the lawyer out to the desert and he confronts him and says, "I know you did this," although as it turns out, he doesn't know that the guy shot himself. He says, "Well, that may be true."
Yes.
But he's certainly tied the lawyer to the death of the hippie, and then he starts talking about God and this land that we're in, and then he puts his head to his chest, and I don't really
and cries.
I don't really follow it.
Well, I mean, he's basically saying this is such a beautiful country, blah 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 blah, but it's now without God and without law, and I mean, Argentina is quite a religious country.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right. I mean, again, when we were visiting there, you had processions on the street, right? People carrying saints and kneeling on the ground and praying. It surprised me. I didn't realize that Argentina was so religious. So I suppose, kind of it's speaking to a national audience. But, for myself, who God doesn't occupy any place in my life, actually, it felt a bit weird. But I suppose, the argument is that there's no morality, and there's no law. People aren't obeying the law in any way, even very decent people and lawyers who are supposed to be upholders of the law.
Is it important that he's Chilean, you think? And and it's not just he's a Chilean actor. The detective he plays is Chilean.
Yes. I think it is important because it's an outsider's perspective into kind of what's going on. And also he breaks through their delusions. So he says something like, how could you imagine that nobody would know in a small town like this? You had an argument with this guy in a restaurant full of people, and that there were 2 gunshots and that nobody heard. Like the whole point is that it is a small town. Everybody knows, right? Yeah. So I thought those things were very interesting. So, for example, when they go to the house to check it out, and there's already a woman in the garden who's clearly doing the same thing, right? And so, did you know the family? Oh, yes, they had 2 blonde kids. Yeah, so kind of all those questions, well, what happened to those 2 blonde kids, right? What happened to this family? I mean, how would you even imagine, like, stealing their house of people you knew? Yeah, like, I really found it very interesting.
She said she didn't know the parents.
Yes.
That's what she says, or at least that's what she claims.
Yeah, that's what she says. So, and
what do you make of the Americans? The American aspect. There's this thing about the American cowboys. It's a troop of 3 or 4 guys who are American cowboys and they speak English and everything, and they're on some kind of
cultural exchange.
Yeah, so they give a gift of a whip, and they receive a gift of a mate set.
Yes.
And the guy that they receive this from is a I can't remember the word they use. Intervener. That's the word. This guy is an intervener, and he has a kind of national thing going on. It's an interesting thing because then after these gifts are exchanged, they go out to do this press conference.
Yes, that's a chilling moment.
To the press there, and he's talking about we exchange these gifts, and isn't it lovely? I've got this whip, and then this reporter is asking questions about the kind of breakdown of civil liberties and this sort of thing. And he doesn't want to answer these questions. Yes. And to the point where he says, who do you work for? What station do you work for? And what's your name? And that's where the scene ends. But that is chilling.
That is chilling because basically it's like a Trumpian moment, right? Where basically I know your name, I know where you work for, and basically you're going to lose your job and you might get shot for asking me these questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, if everyone else is getting disappeared, that guy's getting disappeared.
Yeah, so So the thing about the American cowboys is what they tell you is that the previous intendant or superintendent of the region had not done their job properly.
Yes.
Right. So in fact, you imagine that they've been held prisoners or they've been stranded. Yeah. So something that started off as a cultural exchange turned sour. Right. Therefore, kind of, this public making up for it with gifts and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been presented as a bringing together of our brother lands, I think is the phrase they use. Although I will give myself the credit of having interpreted that myself because that wasn't the way it was in the English subtitles. But I think they say like tierra hermanos.
Yes, I mean, so, and I think that also alludes. I'm not, because I think this military coup was also financed by the Americans.
Sponsored by the US, wasn't it? Kissinger, I think.
Exactly. So I think the film has those resonances. I mean, even for someone who knows as little about Argentina as I do, I think those are things that the film makes legible. So as whenever
there was a military coup in South America in that era, the US had something to do with it.
Yes, Eduardo Galeano wrote a wonderful book called The Open Veins of Latin America, arguing that, that basically kind of, Latin America was bleeding and, it was North America that was wielding the razor, the US in particular. So anyway, I think this is it's a very interesting film that gives you a lot to think about. I don't think it's quite good enough, Well,
as interesting as the chat has been, and I think it really has been, I still was so bored.
Right.
Like, I think it's, in terms of a kind of narrative drive, in terms of really interesting characters, I think it's really weak. It is the themes that it is built upon that are interesting, and it does interesting things with those themes.
Yes,
but still, I couldn't tell you that in the moment to moment, I was interested in what was happening.
Yes,
with the exception of the opening when it was setting up the kind of setting up the drama. Particularly that restaurant scene at the start and everything that went on up until he leaves him basically, and then you get the title of the film. Rojo shows up. Everything pre that was very interesting, but after that, I lost interest in the moment,
Yeah, no, I was interested throughout, but it was very interesting because I was showing a Lubitsch film kind of this morning, and like the thing with Lubitsch is everything he does is with the intent to delight, so, a choice of shot, a piece of language, a camera move, right? It's always like inventive, imaginative. It's meant to like please the audience, right? Or kind of keep, So, I mean, never to detract from the themes or whatever, but kind of to make you see it in a special way. And the thing about this film is that it makes almost no concessions. That, that in fact an audience is there, that kind of, you need to give them a joke, a bit of suspense, some tenser moments, something that's at stake, for the characters, right? Because actually, even at the moment where the hippie threatens to shoot him, it's not quite tense enough, right? And that's like the tensest moment.
And probably even when the guy says, "We brought this detective in," and then the whole thing, it charges up again of, this is going to come back and haunt him. It's still not tense enough.
No, it's not. I mean, and that's it. You have... And actually, the whole detective investigation also happens off screen, right?
Well, I think it would be. I think it is incorrect to consider the film a murder mystery, though. Like, I mean, there's no mystery. We know what happened.
We know,
and the tension around. I suppose there could be more tension, as I say, around the detective story. But actually, how the detective learns what he learns isn't really the interesting.
I think
part.
As soon as you introduce the detective, you have to show some of the machination. So if you watch Columbo, often you see the murder right at the beginning. You know who did it. And the rest of the narrative is just about proving it, right, or trapping the person into. So you bring a detective here who is the second most important character in the whole film, played by the only other name I recognize, and
Yeah, I get what you mean. But I think the way the detective is used is in relation to the lawyer. So like the way that, because when the detective at the very end says to the lawyer, as you say, how can you not have realised that people would remember this argument? I think the thing is, by the time he meets the lawyer, I think you kind of have to have the impression. This is the impression at least I had, that he already knows something.
I know, but
actually in the interactions with the lawyer, he's playing with him to a degree.
All those scenes are very weak.
Yeah, they are. But I think the point is the investigation has pretty much been done by this point.
I know, but you could have used it in such a way that it would add tension,
I agree,
or mystery or suspense. There's none of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and some of it just feels banal. So when he comes in and says, "I want you to drive me to the desert," and the guy just says, "Okay," you know, and you think, like, you know, if I'm a busy lawyer and I'm a big shot in town, you go, "Fuck you! What kind of a person is, you know, what am I, your private chauffeur?" Right, like, you know.
But then I mean, also that drive to the desert, like he goes, okay, we're going to drive to the desert. The desert being where he dumped this body, and this is where the guy's kind of taking him out to for this reason, to have this, in a sense, showdown. And the lawyer gets a gun, puts it in his pocket, so that should be extra tension. And you compare like the drive to the desert in this to the drive to the desert at the end of Seven, for instance.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the difference in tension is just off the scale.
Yes.
You know.
So I think it's kind of, it's a rich film, but actually it's not, you know, with very interesting visuals, that's not yet narratively and dramatically skilled enough, really, to make the most out of what it's working with. That's the way I would characterize it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But nonetheless, raises a lot of interesting questions and has a lot of food for thought.
Yes, certainly anybody here who's interested in, you know, Latin American culture in general, or you know, Argentinian culture in particular, you know, I would highly recommend that they see it. It is kind of worth a visit for them.
What do you think about the title? Why is it called Red? Rojo.
Well, I thought maybe because of the desert, you know, because of the killings, of the blood, and also because a lot of the people who were killed or disappeared or whatever are Red Wings. So when they go into the house, I don't know if you noticed, but they've taken almost everything, but there's still books on the shelf.
Right.
Right? And it was like, I don't know, something in the USSR. I mean, it was clearly a family that had been left wing, right?
Okay.
And also you heard that somebody, you know, was working, or the wife of the, you know, a family had disappeared, and it was partly because the wife was a lawyer who was involved with the unions, right? So I'm not sure if it has any connection to that, but that is a running theme in the film, yeah?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yes. So again, you know, kind of a very rich film in many ways that isn't fully realized, but that nonetheless we recommend to people who have a particular interest in Latin American culture.
I think very fair assessment.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on.
That's what you like. iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
for listening.